Alright, so what did all that talk about James Meredith and the marches and the SCLC and SNCC and all that stuff, what does that all have to do with these films? Well, basically, what I want to suggest is that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night represent this kind of generational split. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is definitely a progressive film, and I in no way want to suggest that it's a conservative old film or anything like that. I mean, but it is made in a much more standard classical Hollywood style. It feels like a movie made in the 50s, and ultimately its theme, as liberal as it might be, as progressive as it might be on the surface, has a very sort of conservative undertone. And that is basically this: the happiness of Joey and John, right? The happiness of this young couple rests on the decision of the white male. It is Mr. Drayton. The whole drama of the film hinges on what he is going to decide. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm in no way suggesting this is a stuffy old conservative film, because again, its intentions are very progressive. Its intentions are very sort of forward-thinking in its politics, right? But there is something kind of old-fashioned and conservative. As I will get to a little bit later, the culture at this point is moving at an incredibly fast pace. It's very hard, I think, for us to appreciate just how much the culture is shaping or changing shape on a daily basis. And by 1967, this film, to a lot of people, is going to start feeling kind of dated. It's going to feel like it's from an older era. Like I said, it feels like a movie that could have been made in the 1950s or the early 1960s. It definitely doesn't have the same spirit as what's happening in America in 1967. On a side note here, this is the last film that Spencer Tracy made, and he died before he could, before the film was actually finished. So that he had done all his parts, but it was before it was edited and before it was released. This is Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn on the set, and I think I'd mentioned before that Hepburn and Tracy are sort of this kind of royal couple of Hollywood. They weren't actually married, if you recall. I mentioned this. They had this kind of weird relationship, but it was a very kind of unique partnership in that, like, they were not only romantically involved, but I think one of the things that bonded them together was they also had a very similar kind of politics, that throughout their lives they'd both been dedicated to progressive liberal causes, such as the civil rights movement. And here, of course, is a picture of them in Woman of the Year. Getting back to the movie, think about the plight of John Prentice's father. He's the only other person who objects to this relationship between John and Joanne. But his opinion doesn't seem to matter, right? No one is concerned that he doesn't approve. The only approval that's required in this movie is the approval of Mr. Drayton. Again, the approval of the white male. In stark contrast, then, we have In the Heat of the Night. And we can think about In the Heat of the Night as being sort of, again, the cinematic equivalent of like Stokely Carmichael and SNCC, right? I Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC. Heat of the Night is SNCC, it's Core, it's Floyd McKissick, it's Stokely Carmichael. This represents a much more modern, much more contemporary sort of understanding of race and racial politics. That this is a film that's not asking for what the white man can do, but rather it's a film in which the black man possesses power. To some extent, all the white people in this movie are helpless. And it's only the black man who can come in and sort of fix this problem. Of course, now he's obviously not perfect. He has faults. It's a very sort of humanized vision, but nonetheless, he's the one in many ways in control. Just a really quick clip here. If you recall, this is from on the waterfront, and this is Marlon Brando on your right, and on the left, of course, is Rod Steiger, who plays the sheriff from In the Heat of the Night. And Rod Steiger was very much a part of that whole method school of acting, and he's considered a great sort of method actor. And I point this out now because I want to look at a couple of scenes from In the Heat of the Night. And in many ways, even though Sidney Poitier is the star of this movie, it's really Rod Steiger who I think carries the bulk of the acting weight. And in some ways, the movie is really about him. It's about this white male authority figure who is realizing that the world around him is changing, or has changed, right? And that he's beginning to see himself as a dinosaur, and recognizing that he himself needs to change, or he'll sort of become extinct in this new world. So in this first scene we're going to look at, take a careful look at again how Rod Steiger goes about confronting this idea that here's a black man who has more power than I do. He makes more money, he knows more, he's in many ways he's the expert. And this is a very strange position for this sheriff to be in, because again, the sheriff is used to being in charge and is most definitely used to being superior to sort of any black person he meets.
Well, now you were the #1 homicide expert.
That's right.
Boy, I bet you get to look at a lot of dead bodies, don't you?
Lots.
Well?
Well, what?
Well, I just thought maybe you wouldn't mind taking a look at this one.
No, thanks.
Well, why not, expert?
Because I've got a train to catch.
Oh, wait a minute. That train don't leave till 12 o'clock noon. Look, they pay you $162.39 a week just to look at bodies. Why can't you look at this one?
Why can't you look at it for yourself?
Because I'm not an expert. Officer.
Okay, so let's look at this scene one more time and pay careful attention to sort of how much difficulty he has in doing something as simple as asking Tibbs to examine this body, right? I mean, it's incredibly painful for him to have to do this. And then sort of his use of the word expert, he says it twice here, right? First he calls Tibbs an expert in a mocking way, like, well, why can't you look at it, you expert, right? It's a very sort of sarcastic tone. And then at the very end of the scene, when he's sort of yelling at Tibbs, saying, I can't, I'm not the expert, right? There's that sudden sort of, again, this sense of, I've just told this black person that he's better than I am, right? And it's an incredibly painful, difficult thing to do, and I think Tibbs realizes this, right? And there's a sort of long shot on Tibbs that the camera just stays on him, and it's very quiet, and you look at the way Poitier is sort of looking off, and he can't look at the sheriff either, because this is a very awkward situation. I think Tibbs recognizes how difficult this is for the sheriff, that this is not something that he's accustomed to, and in some ways he's respectful of that.
Well, now you were the #1 homicide expert.
That's right.
Boy, I bet you get to look at a lot of dead bodies, don't you?
Lots.
Well?
Well, what?
Well, I just thought maybe you wouldn't mind taking a look at this one.
No, thanks.
Well, why not, expert?
Because I've got a train to catch.
Oh, wait a minute. That train don't leave till 12 o'clock noon. Look, they pay you $162.39 a week just to look at bodies. Why can't you look at this one?
Why can't you look at it for yourself?
Because I'm not an expert. Officer.
So before I talk about the next scene, I want to talk quickly about the town of Sparta, where of course the film takes place. And this is a photograph of what Sparta looks like today, right? It's a very small town. There's not much going on. But Sparta is not in Mississippi. There is no Sparta, Mississippi. This is Sparta, Illinois. The movie is set in Mississippi, but they could not shoot in Mississippi. Instead, they had to go a little bit north of Mississippi to Illinois, to southern Illinois. And again, if you look at this map here, you can see how, Mississippi, you go through Tennessee, Kentucky, and you get to southern Illinois there. The reason they had to shoot in Illinois was that there were death threats, right? In the South, especially in Mississippi, they did not want this crew coming in and making this movie, especially a movie starring a black actor like Sidney Poitier. The only part of the film that actually was shot in Mississippi is this scene here, right? Because there are no cotton fields in Illinois, so they had to go into Mississippi secretly. They didn't tell anyone that they were filming, because normally you have to get a permit from the state to do any kind of filming, but they did this kind of secretly. They went in pretending they were doing something else, like a news story, whatever, and they quickly took these shots of Tibbs and the sheriff driving through cotton country, and these are actually real cotton pickers from Mississippi, right? So all these people here, they're not extras or anything, they're real cotton pickers. They probably didn't have any idea that a movie was being made. And in the stories that the director tells about the making of this movie, he talks about how incredibly scared everyone was. Like they constantly felt their life was in danger, and they had to sort of quickly make these shots and then get out, right? So here we are now. So this is sort of cut into the shot of the Endicott house, which is actually now back in Illinois somewhere. They are no longer in Mississippi. And I just want to show, of course, this one last little bit here as Tibbs and the sheriff walk into the house. You're going to see in the foreground, right, a full shot of the black jockey here, right? And this, of course, is used to indicate, what kind of person Endicott is, right? That he is sort of an old school racist, that the kind of this modern world where a person like Tibbs could become an officer is just, not the world that Endicott lives in. So, let me end it here, and we'll move on to the next section, talk about another scene from Heat of the Night.